So what is existentialism? It's not really so complicated. He does a fantastic job of explaining what, at least from his own point of view, from Sartre's own point of view, existentialism, the central thesis, and that's, if we look at the top of page 3. He's mentioned some various thinkers of the time who were considered existentialists, and this one thinks that, and that one thinks that. But what is it that ties them all together? He says what they have in common is simply the fact that they believe that existence comes before essence. And that's the great slogan of existentialism, that existence precedes or existence comes before essence. And although that at first sounds a little baffling, once it's explained, it makes plenty of sense. And he explains it beautifully. The analogy, or the example he gives, is of the paper knife. And a paper knife is not a knife made out of paper, but a knife that's used for cutting paper. And I believe that for cutting the pages of books apart. Books used to come with some of the pages stuck together. And they had special knives that were meant to cut the pages. What's the difference between you and me as human beings and an object like a paper knife? Well, if Sartre is saying that for a human being our existence precedes, or our existence comes before our essence, then the opposite is true for an object like a paper knife. That is, its essence comes before its existence. And what that just means is that the idea of it came before the thing itself. That is, if we have an object here, like let's say a cell phone, okay, here is an existing object. It exists, but its essence, in the sense of its idea, what it's for, what its purpose is, what it's supposed to do, that existed in the minds of its creators before the actual thing came into the world. And that's this point that he makes about the paper knife. That is, it has a purpose that is inherent in the thing, something that it's for, as opposed to you and me. Now, if we have certain traditional religious views of human existence, would say that we are somewhat like the paper knife insofar as God created us, and created us with a purpose, and created us with a certain inherent structure of what we're supposed to do, and how we're supposed to be, what sort of lives we're supposed to lead, and what are good and bad choices, etc. But for Sartre, all that rests on a belief in God. And he has called himself an atheistic existentialist. So we take God out of the picture. We also take out the notion that human beings were created with some purpose or essence in mind. And what are we left with? Well, again, at the bottom of page 3, he says this: atheistic existentialism, of which I am a representative, declares with greater consistency that if God does not exist, there is at least one being whose existence comes before its essence. That is, a being that simply exists without any kind of pre-established notion of what it is, how it's supposed to be, what its purpose is, etc. There's at least one being whose existence comes before its essence, a being which exists before it can be defined by any conception of it. That being is man, human beings, us. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. If man, as the existentialist sees him, is not definable, it is because, to begin with, he is nothing. That is, there is no such thing as human nature. If we consider human nature to be something we're born with, or something that unfolds in us in this sort of predetermined notion as we live, that there's none of that there for Sartre. And take away God, and take away the so-called divine artisan, we have no basis for saying that there's anything essential about a human being. Human beings just are. He continues, he will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. This well sort of known existentialist thesis that human beings are what they make of themselves. They're not born with a certain structure or nature. Their nature is a result of their decisions that they make with their lives. Sartre continues, thus there is no human nature, because there is no God to have a conception of it. Man simply is. Not that he is simply what he conceives himself to be, but he is what he wills, and as he conceives himself after already existing, as he wills to be after that leap towards existence, man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. That is the first principle of existentialism. I think it's good to read this in any class that's about human nature, because this is the most radical thesis perhaps there is about human nature, and that there is no human nature. Human beings are what they make of themselves through their decisions. There's no higher authority, there's no God, there's no Platonic heaven of ideals that would inform them of what they're supposed to be or how they're supposed to live. They are utterly their own creation. And that, well, what immediately sort of question that raises itself is that if there is no higher authority or no nature, no human nature that we can sort of say we're some inherent structure of human beings where they could sort of consult it and find out how they're supposed to live, how do we make these decisions that by which we define ourselves, by which we define our nature? It's a very large question which he deals with.